Thank you very much. Bishop, it's an honor to be back. I thank you and the other bishops and pastors who are participating and the other religious leaders who are here in this audience. I want to thank Monica, John, Carl, Nathan, the entire Conyers family for inviting me to come and pay tribute to my friend. I want to thank this amazing array of political leaders who have come here. John Conyers is 90. People can say, oh, that's so yesterday. But the governor, the lieutenant governor, the senators, the members of the House of Representatives, the leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus, the mayor, the county executive, the chief federal judge, Reverend Jackson, you even have Professor Michael Eric Dyson to deliver the eulogy. Don't worry. It says professor, but it means preacher. You'll be just fine. I'd like to thank the people of Detroit for electing him 27 times. I'd like to thank you for giving him the space and the support, not just to faithfully represent his district, but to represent people all across our country and even around the world on the things that we should all care about. He was out there banging the drum against apartheid in South Africa long before it was a widely popular cause. He always supported the people of Haiti, even when he could not support their government. He said, the people deserve a better deal, and the United States should be a good neighbor. He worked for all of our cities and for jobs and employment and opportunity and peace and justice everywhere. Not every district gives their elected representative the elbow room to do all those things. So I thank you for giving John his head. He never forgot about you either. When somebody served as long and as well as John did, it's tempting to make sure you list every last bill that he sponsored or co-sponsored or had something to do with. In a way, that's a big mistake because it tends to turn history into dry bones. The most important thing is to remember how different the playing field was when he began than when he ended. How steep the mountains he climbed were, how long the battles lasted, and how many real lives were improved by his labors. When John Conyers came to Washington in January of 1965, I had just turned 18 years old. There were 0 African American senators. The Civil Rights Act had been on the books for 6 months, but still millions of African Americans could not exercise the constitutional right to vote. When John was assigned to the Judiciary Committee, its only African American member, the first big piece of legislation he worked on was the Voting Rights Act. And He kept reminding his colleagues that civil rights bills were passed in 1957, 1960, and 1964, and they kept getting better and better and better, except for one thing. They did not protect and guarantee the right to vote. He said he was afraid if we missed this last chance with President Johnson and his high level of popularity and enormous majorities for the Democratic Party in the House and Senate, it might never come this way again. And when it passed, he said it was the most important thing he would ever work on. He had no way of knowing then that he'd hang around in Congress for 53 more years. But he was probably right. For all the power in our democratic system flows through our willingness and our ability to intelligently and consistently exercise the right to vote. The effects of that bill were immediate. By 1968, the percentage of African Americans registered to vote had gone from 6 to 60% nationwide. Even in the South, where there had been extreme efforts to register voters then, registration in Alabama went from to 60%, from 19 to 51% in Louisiana. And when he did all this, there were fewer than 1,000 African Americans. Think of that. In any form of local, state, or national office in this whole country. Today, there are more than 10,000. The Congressional Black Caucus, of which John was a co-founder, began this session with a record 55 members. They're getting very close to the actual percentage of African Americans in the United States. And I'm grateful that nearly half of them are women, including the current chair. I'm also grateful because Barack Obama, Jimmy Carter, and Bill Clinton would never have become president without the Voting Rights Act and the support of people like those in this church. Over the years, John co-sponsored every single reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, as well as the motor voter law to make it easier to register, which was one of the first laws I signed as president. He fought tooth and nail against every encroachment on the right to vote, including sponsoring legislation to restore crucial elements of the Voting Rights Act that were unforgivably gutted by that Supreme Court decision in 2013. John knew there were no permanent victories in human affairs, but he also knew there were no permanent defeats. So he kept on going right to the very end. One of the things that I liked about him is he didn't give up on things he thought were important. I remember, I think John Conyers was the first person that ever quoted Frederick Douglass to me in saying, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. Never did and never will." He understood that. Just 4 days after Dr. King was killed in Memphis, he introduced the first bill to make his birthday Martin Luther King Day. It took 15 years to pass, but John never gave up. And he kept reaching out to Republicans as well as Democrats. And he passed it 15 years later, and President Reagan signed it into law. It was more than a day on the calendar. It recognized that the struggle for equality deserves a special place in the nation's awareness and reverence and dedication. And we could find no better way to do it than by honoring its most eloquent spokesperson, who paid the ultimate price for convictions we should all share. After Matthew Shepard and James Byrd were murdered in 1998, he sponsored our bill, my administration's bill, to strengthen and expand the federal government's power to prosecute hate crimes. We tried, and I couldn't get it passed in my 8 years, but John kept on reintroducing it. And finally, it was signed into law by President Obama in 2009. It took all that time. But John kept on pushing. I could give you a lot of examples. His devotion to universal coverage in health care, to civil rights, to responsible gun safety legislation. John was a co-sponsor of the Brady Bill for background checks. 2 million felons, fugitives, and stalkers have been denied guns because of simple background checks. As bad as the current spate is, it would be far worse if that bill had never passed, and we should honor John Conyers by making those checks universal now. He co-sponsored the family and medical leave law. By the time I left office, 35 million people had claimed it when a baby was born or a parent was sick. It's now gotten so important to people, and so many people are in the workplace, that last year alone, 20 million people took advantage of the family and medical leave law. Why do I say this? Because people think policy is boring until they need it. What? Oh, that's so boring. Don't bother me with all that policy stuff. Just tell me who I'm supposed to hate. John Conyers got up every day and worked his mind. And a very fine mind it was. And he also did some simple things that proved that his brain was connected to his heart, which is, I find as I grow older, quite important. There is no better example than how he responded to Rosa Parks moving to Detroit. And I know everybody in this church knows the story, but this funeral will be reported on. And it is important that every American know this. Rosa Parks couldn't make a living at home in Alabama. She needed to make a living. You know, even an icon has to eat, buy clothes, and have a place to sleep. We often forget that. John Conyers, a young congressman, then knew that Rosa Parks was in a fix. So he hired her. And she worked for him in his local district for 20-something years, 23 years, I think, until she retired. Probably never got a vote out of it. But it's something to me that said as much about who he was and what he believed in and what he cared about as anything he ever did. And I wish Hillary could have come with me today, but she and my daughter Chelsea are off on an obligation promoting a book they wrote. So she sends her regards and prayers, but she said, don't forget to tell the truth about John Bill, why you really liked him. And I said, you mean because he stuck up for me when they were trying to string me up? She said, no, he was quite good at that. But no, you really liked him because he thought jazz music would be mandatory in heaven. That it, most important thing ever done. I have two enduring memories of John Conyers that were entirely personal. One was when he and his beautifully dressed young son there went with me, or took me, to the Detroit Auto Show. Because as a kid, I grew up hanging around my dad's little Buick business in a town of only 6,000. And later, when he moved to another town and ran the parts department, my job was to take inventory. It was a big deal down there. I'm so old, I can remember when you could still fix your own car. And not everything was automated, digital, everything. It was a car. You were supposed to be able to fix it if you bought it. The second thing I remember is that an incredible gift, he got Lionel Hampton, who then was nearing 90, to come play for me at the White House. And it was 1998, and the band was there, and Hamp was no longer young, but still in great form, and they asked me to sit in with the band, and I think we played My Funny Valentine. But here's the interesting thing. I thought a lot about this. Jazz is an interesting form of music. There's a tune you have to know, a key you've got to play it in, and a chord structure you have to follow. But that's not all. You've got to also make up a little as you go along. You've got to be creative about how you use the tools. And that's the way politics is. Constitution is the tune. The laws set the key. That's the rules. And the facts, well, they form the basis on which we both live or don't, and are creative or destructive. John Conyers' autobiography might have been subtitled Jazz in the Key of Life. That's why he got jazz declared our fundamental language. So I ask you to think about that. His friend's Lionel Hampton's greatest hit was called Flying Home. Our friend John, he's finally flying home. He made some beautiful music in the key of life. Like all great jazz musicians, Coltrane, Miles, Charlie Parker, he was not perfect, and that made his achievements all the more important and all the more meaningful. So remember that when you go home. Remember the circumstance, the action, the impact, and make your own music. God bless you, friend. Thank you.